Matt, good to see you as always. Thanks for taking a bit of time to come on. Appreciate that. Just to kick things off, I mean, let's start. Let me ask you about the mission. What is it you're trying to achieve with your business? I mean, give us a sense of what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to do.
Oh, world domination, Paul. Does that
That's what
count?
I like to hear.
We just want to take over everything. It's an interesting question because it's changed a lot over the last year or two, I would say. Um, before I mean, to get a bit of background, I suppose, I do e-commerce. It's what we do. We sell stuff online. And then we sold that business and we started selling stuff online for other people. We started managing their e-commerce businesses. And then we sort of got good at that. And then we thought, well, let's get back into e-commerce for ourselves again. And
Right.
so then we realized we weren't great at the startup, which is, it's just one of the, apparently I don't have the energy for it these days, Paul. I don't know why. But what we discovered was in that whole process was we're really good at helping businesses that were in a certain, sort of turnover space in e-commerce and online sales. So sort of, it's 500,000 starting then and moving up to about 3 million. And we realized quite quickly, actually, our framework, our methodology works super well with that bracket, that, sort of not everybody, not everything, but, that's the sort of one of the ideas that we're looking for, I suppose. And so over the last 12, 18 months, we've pivoted the business slightly. So we still manage other people's e-commerce. We still do e-commerce services. We still run our own e-commerce businesses, but we're sort of going on a bit of an acquisition spree at the moment. So, it's like I was saying to you before we've just gone and acquired a new company.
Mhm.
I've just taken a 50% stake in an e-com business that is called Seven Yays. It does sort of birthday advent calendars. So
Oh,
yeah, it's quite fascinating. But the thing that intrigued me was, well, gifts are gifts, aren't they? I mean, I don't know if I'd ever just want to do a pure gift site because that'd be super competitive. And I failed years ago at doing a gift company, but that's another story. But the way they package the gifts, I think, is quite unique. Um, and so yeah, our mission now then is to grow our acquisitions, I suppose. We want to carry on helping people do their own e-com stuff online, but I think we just like to build a little portfolio, do like a little mini hook group, um, and just take what we've learned and sort of build it out that way. And
yeah,
we seem to be a lot more successful with that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting world, e-commerce, isn't it? Well, I mean, it's just that example you gave about the advent calendar people a bit and it being
Yeah,
sort of unique. I mean, is it uniqueness that you look for? Is that the thing that sort of sets them apart, or is that just one of the things? I mean,
I think it's one of many, isn't it? It's like anything. When you look at getting involved in a business, the biggest question I think I ask myself when I'm talking with companies about potential acquisitions, can I make a difference? And
right,
can I add value? If I can, then I'm really intrigued. And over the years, we've figured out that our strength is in small products, so gifts, beauty products, supplements, those kind of things we do well at. I'm not saying that I never would, but I've never, for example, owned a company which sells couches or rocking chairs. Do you know what I mean? Or those kind of things. One of the companies that we're involved with at the moment, we're talking about, do we start doing protein powders? And I mean, protein powder is another crazy competitive industry, but we could do it because of our audience. Um, and we get nervous with things like that because protein powders are quite big. Do you know
yeah,
what I mean? In relation to a supplement, they're like 20 times bigger. So you need a lot more storage, and so that then becomes another headache. It's not a bad problem to have if you're shifting the stuff, but it's just a different problem. And so, yeah, we look at all kinds of things. The size of the product, is it small? Is it repeatable? We like to be able to sell to people more than once. We're really good at doing that. Is it unique? How is the business built? What's the values of the business? And then you look at the usual stuff, don't you? Is there any debt in the business? Is a tax man going to come and, put me in jail if I
Exactly.
take
Yeah,
over and stuff? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, sure. Okay. And let me ask you, when was the moment? And tell us about the moment when you thought this business could be global. I mean, tell us about that, when did that happen? And how did you know? I mean, just tell us about that.
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because in every company I've been involved with, if I think back through my career, there has been an element of international markets. I've
Right.
never, with the except, well, e- I suppose, Paul, even when I worked as a 15-year-old in the chippy, there was an element of the international because the couple that owned it were a Greek couple and they were lovely. Do you know what I mean? And you just, but very different to what I understood at the time. But so yeah, I think we've always had an international sort of flair. So I got involved in saunas years ago, and we imported those from Germany. And we realized if we took our UK clients over to Germany, that was the first sell. If I could get somebody to go to Germany and have a look at how it's done in Germany, then I could sell them a lot easier.
Oh,
Because there was the culture and the story. Whereas if I just tried to sell them the sauna straight, it was much more difficult because the saunas we were selling were like 10 times the price of anybody else. So
right.
we had to understand that there was a journey and what we were actually selling when. Um, but when we got into e-commerce, initially it was obviously UK based, and then I got involved in Jersey Beauty Company, and obviously that was selling beauty products from Jersey into the UK, but also into Europe because Brexit back then
Mm.
you could sell into Europe, and that was super easy. So there was that international element. But now with our supplements business, we sell literally all over the world. Um, and we sell, for example, a shed load of products to the States. Um, and we've tried doing things like setting up a US distribution hub, which we've subsequently closed down because actually we do it better from England. And England's, with the shipping times, it's all right. Um, so it's one of those where I think there's always been this sort of international feel with whatever we've done. And I don't know, Paul, until you sent me the questions, and I started to think about this. I don't know if I ever had borders in my thinking when it came to people and customers because I've always worked internationally. And so I always thought of the world as pretty borderless. Customers are customers, people are people. And we have these sort of artificial borders that we throw up around the world to mark land and country and territory and things like that, which is fine. I'm not got an issue with it, obviously, but I think from a business point of view, just because someone's on the other side of a line on a map doesn't mean that I can't sell stuff to them, with the exception of maybe 3 or 4 countries in the world. I can't ship products to at the moment. But I think it's always been there. I don't remember one specific time going,
Right.
yeah.
It's part of your mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. When we did the beauty company, we sold other people or other brands. So I didn't manufacture the beauty products. I took other brands and I sold them, popular brands. And the other brands had limitations. So they were like, well, you can only sell in Europe. They actually only wanted me to sell in England, but of course the rules at the time were you could sell in Europe and there was nothing they could do really to stop that. So we sold in Europe because I wanted to sell everywhere. When we got involved with the supplements, that's our own brand, that's our own IP. So no one was telling me there. So we're like, let's just list every country on our website that we can possibly think of, and if we sell it there, then we'll figure out how to actually ship it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really healthy mindset, and I think one of the things I like about business people is that not all of them, but a lot of business people have a similar kind of mindset, which is
Mm,
if people need it, we can sell it to them,
yeah,
and the borders just are the things that kind of you just have to figure out a way sort of through them or around them or
yeah.
whatever. Let me ask you though, I mean, that mindset, I can sell anywhere. I mean, how do you then go from okay, well, I can sell anywhere. How do you then turn that into a strategy, though, for attacking particular markets or
Mm.
growing the business overall? I mean, how do you translate the mindset into a way of working that allows you to open up the US or open up Germany or whatever? I mean, how do you translate it into a strategy?
I think there's you can for me you start off simple. You keep it simple and you figure it out as you go along. I'm a big fan of the phrase it's easy to turn a car when it's moving, right? And so we started, for example, we all we did was we said, well, yeah, people from America could buy. And then people from America started buying and we started to look at the questions people asked. And so then we thought, well, let's solve these problems. Let's look at these questions and figure out the best way to deal with those. So let's set up an American website. Let's set up the ability to buy true US dollars. You know, not it's not to show a US price and there's credit card conversion fees. Let's actually sell in US dollars. Let's understand. And here's the interesting thing, isn't it? So you take something like omega-3, a best-selling product on the supplement site, right? It's a vegan omega-3, so it's quite a unique product. In many ways, won lots of awards. It's the strongest form of omega-3. It's very pure, and it's, there's all kinds of reasons why I'm a big fan of this particular product. And let's take that product there. Well, I can easily on the website say, yes, you can buy from America. I can now, and the technology now is very different to what it was 10 years ago. The technology now enables me to sell that in US dollars. It enables me to calculate shipping in a fraction of a second. So everything's done and right. What doesn't happen with e-commerce and where I think the opportunities for international selling lie and where the global aspect comes into it is the reason somebody buys omega-3 in America might be very different to why they buy it in Germany. And so understanding why that is really, really important, especially in your emerging markets or markets that you want to play in. You've actually got to spend a bit of time getting to know your customers because you can't assume just because you sell it in England, you'll be able to sell it in the States or Germany with the same marketing. Do you see what I mean? You
Yeah,
you
yeah, no,
you
I
you
get it
have
totally.
to understand the local thinking, I think, a little bit more. The local vernacular, the local like how the Americans speak, although they speak English, is obviously very different to the English, and how the Americans like to be marketed to is very different to how the English like to be marketed to. And so I think understanding those nuances is is actually quite critical. That's not to say I think you have to have a marketing strategy for every single country on the planet, but I do think with your best markets or the markets you want to do well in, you almost have to treat that as its own thing, and treat that client there. That don't assume about that customer is going to be the same as a customer in the UK.
Yeah, and I mean, what you're saying is that understand your customers, isn't it? Which
Yeah, absolutely.
I've always thought was pretty good business advice. I mean, it's easier to say
It's
than do it.
yeah,
Yeah,
pretty straightforward advice. Yeah,
yeah,
know what it is you're selling and know who you're selling it to.
yeah,
The two key things, aren't they?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, and I mean, I think I'm all for simple stuff, and that seems to me to be a nice, simple, genuine, good, useful piece of advice. So, just following on from that, and so one of the interesting things about building a global business is that the role of the CEO. I think is quite difficult in that context,
Mm,
because you've got a lot on your plate. And in very big businesses, you can delegate a lot of things, but unless you employ
yeah.
an awful lot of people, you can't always delegate stuff. So tell me about how you see the kind of role of the CEO there. I mean, you're obviously busy, you're acquiring other companies in lots of different, you're dealing with lots of different jurisdictions, lots of different products and so on. I mean, how do you see the role of the CEO? I mean, what is it that you think makes that work well?
It's a great question because I think I don't know if I am your atypical CEO. I have to be honest with you. I have a phenomenal team, and
Mm,
I wake up every day and I write down in my journal things that I'm grateful for. And that's, a big one is my team. They are extraordinary people who do an extraordinary job and deal with the quirks of Matt rather well, which I think is a good thing. So I think for me, that's the first thing as CEO is I have to make sure the team around me, regardless of its size, we're not a massive company,
mm,
um, but regardless of its size, I have to make sure that that team knows what they're doing, right? And understands where we're going and is excited to be going there and is keen to get there with me. I think if you can do that, then that's most of the battle won, isn't it? Um, and so for me, I clearly understand my role in the business. I don't micromanage. I don't get involved in tremendous amounts of detail. Sometimes, if there's a problem, I sort of am a bit Elon Musky. If there's a problem, let's just brainstorm this for a day and
Yeah, yeah,
figure it out.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but I think we hire really smart people, so I don't think I know more than them, which is all. But on the other hand, I suppose I do feel like I have something of value to say because I've been around the industry for a little bit, and I might not have the answers, but I know how to ask the right question.
Mm,
And I think if I think about our team, if our team can't solve it, I would say 99% of the time I know instantly who I need to go and ask to solve that problem for me.
right.
Because I'm very well connected. I'm very well networked in the industry. We have a podcast a bit like you, where we just meet some really insanely cool people,
Mm,
all of whom have become really helpful allies or even really good friends, And so I think my role is to be networked. Um, it's just make sure the team's empowered and actually just ask the right questions,
mm,
and we seem to make it work. Um, I think we're at an interesting junction as the company at the moment because now we're acquiring more companies. We're obviously gaining a lot more staff with each acquisition, and so I think that brings its own set of problems.
yeah, same.
Um,
Yeah.
and but it's an interesting journey to be on, and we've been around that sort of thing before. We've had many more staff than we've had now in previous iterations of our life. So I appreciate that running a company with 30 staff is very different to running a company with 15 staff, which is, very different to running a company with three staff. Um, but yeah, I think for me, it's the team. If I've got that team functioning right and well, then all is good with the world. You know that phrase? I don't know if you've ever used it. I don't know if you. I use it all the time in my house. Happy wife, happy life. Um,
I don't use that phrase, but I can see what you're saying.
yeah. It's I've been married 27 years, and people say, I use it all the time. If my wife is happy, life is happy.
Yeah,
And so part of your role as the husband is just creating optimal conditions for happiness to
yeah.
to flourish, right?
Same
And
here.
I think it's the same in business. As the CEO, you create optimal conditions for the team to flourish, and it seems to work well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think there's definitely a lot of truth in that. If you can get, I mean, it's not rocket science at one level. If you get a good team and get them doing the right things, you're probably going to make more progress than you would otherwise. I mean,
Hmm.
it seems to be fairly sensible. And one of the other interesting things about the job of the CEO is, I mean, and you may feel differently about this, but I think the job of the CEO is often to negotiate the right sort of arrangements with your partners in different
Yeah.
parts of the world and what have you. I mean, what's your take on that process of negotiating the right deal and figuring out the right people to work with? I mean, what's your take on those sorts of issues?
Yeah, so I would say I totally agree with you. I mean, in some respects, if I just focus purely on e-commerce, it's very easy because I don't have to negotiate with the clients. The price is what the price. You put your credit card in, you buy it, you don't, right? Then it becomes about persuasion with marketing. Um, with the acquisitions though, that the reason part of the reason I'm loving it as much as I am is actually I am actually in the room negotiating with people and trying to create deals where there's a win for me and there's a win for them. And you have the avoiding the usual default of I want to sell my business. I have a price in my head. Can you give me that cash? Yes or no? No, therefore I'm not going to sell. It's just a bit dull and boring. But I think if you can be creative in that process, then some really interesting deals can be done. And I absolutely love it. I genuinely do love it. And I think um, honing your skills as a negotiator, even in e-commerce, I think as someone who can persuade, who can see an argument from both sides of the table, um, who can maybe create a solution that no one's really thought of before and think outside the box. I think is so critical as a role of the CEO. I mean, it's critical for negotiation, understanding what it is that people want. There's a there's a company, I won't say who it was, but there's a company that approached me. Um, they were doing a management buyout, which
Mm.
didn't, it sort of, how would you describe it? It kind of fell through a little bit, really. And the reason it fell through was because actually the management team didn't understand that negotiation was not about getting what they wanted, it was about understanding what the other person needed. So if they understood what it was that the guy selling the business to the management team actually needed, they would have been able to structure a deal. But because they were so tunnel focused on what it was that they thought they wanted, the deal just fell apart before it even got started. Do you
Mm.
see what I mean? And so I think as a CEO, maybe it's an experience thing, Paul. I don't know. Maybe you've got some thoughts on this. Maybe it's because you've worked in a different mechanism, a different way. You see things differently, and you can create solutions maybe that other people wouldn't have had, which is maybe what makes us good negotiators. I don't know. It's an interesting
I
thought.
mean, it strikes me, I mean, I'm no expert, but it strikes me that it's pretty critical to get those things right, however you do it. And, it's a really important skill. I mean, to be successful in business, you probably have to be reasonably good at negotiating because it's
Yeah.
part of what you have to do all the time, isn't it? So it strikes me as a pretty important skill. The thing that was going through my mind as you were speaking there was about when you're, you know, integrating a new team. If you just bought a business and you're integrating the new team, I mean, how do you feel about that process? Because you're not just I mean, you may have reached a deal to buy the company, but you've then got to, as it were, deal with the emotional fallout for the people that have been acquired and the impact potentially on your own team and how you bring
Mhm.
them together and get people pointing in the same direction and so on. I mean, what's your take on that process? That, I mean, my view is that that can also be quite hard work sometimes.
Yeah, it can be, and actually, I think it can derail a whole acquisition.
Mm.
Um,
Bit wrong, yeah.
it's a really interesting problem, isn't it? And I think again, so when we're looking at acquisitions, one of the things that I'm looking at, and it's the same when we hire people, um, I look more at culture than perhaps most would or do. So, um, if we acquire a company which has a similar approach to life or a similar mindset or a similar culture, then the assimilation tends to be a lot easier.
Mm.
Um, if I acquire a company with a very different culture, um, then I know I'm going to have problems, certainly in the early days. And there's going to be a big clash, and people are going to regale against it. And so, if I'm honest with you, Paul, my answer to this is simple. I just don't acquire companies where there's a massive culture clash.
And how
Um,
do you know when it's got the same culture? Because I mean, groups of people are very different, aren't they? And things on the surface might look the same, but they're not always underneath, are they? I mean, how do you work out whether it's the cultural fit? I mean, that seems to me to be, you've got this company, you've got that company. How
mhm.
do you work out whether they're right? I mean, that seems to me to be quite a complicated task.
Yeah, I mean, there's many ways to answer it, but perhaps um, it's a book in itself, isn't it? In many ways.
Probably.
But I think if I was to going to give, if I was ever going to give one piece of advice, it would be simply to ask so I would ask the other person, tell me about when things went wrong or when things got difficult. Because again, I'm a big believer in whatever is in a man's heart comes out of his mouth, right? It's really interesting when you look at people, certainly in my own life and in other people's life. There can be a facade, there can be a statement, there can be, oh, we're like this or we're like that. And it's a bit like a ketchup bottle, is the best way I know how to describe it. The plastic ketchup bottles. It can be red on the outside. It can even say tomato ketchup on the bottle, but it's not until you squeeze it a little bit that you find out what's really on the inside.
Yeah.
And I think people under pressure reveal true character. And So I am more intrigued about when things went wrong, not because I'm looking for how they solved it. I'm just looking at language. I'm looking at, do you know what I mean, what their resilience level was like. I'm looking at what their approach was.
Mm.
I like to ask questions where there's no right or wrong answer, because I just want to understand the story. Um, in fact, you can't see it, but on the wall there's a sign just next to me, and it's a big sign which I carved out of wood, it just simply says, "What's the story?"
Mm.
And it's perhaps my favorite question. And I think if I can understand that, then it doesn't matter what their culture statement says, what their values are or what they think their values are. Actually, what matters is what they do when they're under pressure. And I tell you a really interesting secret that I don't know if I probably should say this. It depends who's listening, I suppose. One of the things I absolutely love to do, let's say I'm acquiring a business which is run by a fella. I want to go to dinner with him and his wife
Because,
because you find out about the fella.
okay.
Do you see what I mean? How he tells his life and how his wife tells his life. Not always the same story. And it doesn't mean one's right or one's wrong. It just gives you a bit more of a complete picture.
Yeah.
And so I am very keen. And in fact, if I can, before any deal is done, I'm like, right, my wife and I want to take you and your wife out for dinner.
Mm. I mean, it's
And
interesting your point there, I think, because there are always multiple ways of seeing the same thing, aren't there? I mean, people look
mhm,
at it in different ways, and men and women see things in different ways, and people in different places in the kind of conversation, if you like, people at different have different vantage points on the
mhm.
story. They'll give you different perspectives.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can see that. Just to follow that point a little bit. I mean, doing business in, I don't know, Germany is very different to doing business in the US or doing
Mhm.
business in Singapore or what have you. I mean, and in one sense, it's because the story is different.
Yeah.
The way people see, act, behave, think
Mhm.
feel in the US, as a for instance, very different to, I don't know, France or whatever. I mean, how do you manage that perspective on things? Now, I know e-commerce is, there's a price and there's a product, and in one
Mhm.
sense, it's quite simple. But if you're building relationships with partners in different jurisdictions, it's presumably a bit more complicated than that. I mean, what's your take on that sort of issue?
It is and it isn't. I think there is culture, and you do have to understand story. And I think again, coming back to what Zig Ziglar, famously said, people buy from people they know, like, and trust, right? So I think you have to build that know, like, and trust factor, and doing that with someone in Germany is different to how I would do it with someone in the UK. And we had business partners in Germany for the longest time, and so I started to understand a bit more about Germany. And I remember, when when we were doing the saunas, I took over some engineers from the UK, and I had to take them aside and I say, "Listen, guys, let me just talk to you before we go and do this training. I know you are going to want to joke about the war because that's what the Brits do. The
Yeah.
Germans don't. So let's not joke about the war. Just just avoid it, right?" And of course, in hindsight, I maybe should have worded it differently, because everything they then wanted to do was you could see it in their heads. They were trying not to crack the jokes. And so it's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think, yes, there is story, yes, there is culture, but people are people, and there are some fundamentals which never change, and they never change throughout history. And that is, people are motivated by story. They're motivated by kindness,
Mm.
whatever kindness means to them. Integrity matters more than you think in the majority of the known world. And the power of a handshake and keeping your word is still perhaps the most important principle in business, right? And I think so. There are nuances, but there are some things which I think stay the same. Um, and 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 they're ageless, they're timeless. And I think even if I didn't fully understand the culture in, say, Japan, if I was, for example, if I was going to go do business in Japan, I would spend days studying and learning about the Japanese, about their culture, about their society, about what they, is it an honor shame culture? What that means? What does that mean compared to someone who grows up in England, where maybe it's a slightly different culture, how would they interpret things? And with AI now, you can get such a download of information. Why would you not? Um, I think learning language is really important. So the first time I ever went over to Germany and met our German partners, this was, I mean, this was pre-internet, right? So it's just sort of, that's how long ago it was. But I'd memorized certain German phrases, um, because actually just trying to do their language, even though I am absolutely awful at speaking German, but just having a go
Yeah, make
made
it
a
better.
huge difference, right? And so understanding what that means in different cultures. So maybe in one country, it's not necessarily they want you to try and speak the language, but maybe they really, really want you to eat their food, and come around to their house rather than go, oh, no, no, don't. We're English. We don't like to bother anybody. But actually, maybe in that country, that actually that's not a great thing to do. And so there's no excuse, I think, for that kind of rudeness anymore. Um, and I think, yeah, you can understand those types of things.
I mean, it seems to me what you're saying is it's about it comes back to this thing about understanding other people and understanding
Mm,
what customer matters to customers, whether it's specifically about selling them a product or understanding how their kind of world works. If you want to do business with them or form a partnership or whether it's that
yeah.
willingness to understand the needs of other people, really. And I mean, your point about integrity being important. I mean, I certainly think that's the case. And business runs on that, doesn't it?
Mm,
If
yeah, it
people
does.
don't trust you, it won't do business with you.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I don't, Donald Trump doesn't seem to have figured that out, but it seems to have.
I think this is really interesting, isn't it? Because I remember, again, I won't mention names, but there's a chap when I was involved in the sauna game who, a billionaire, who took me under his wing, mentored me a little bit, and it was just really fascinating. And I see Trump doing what he did in terms of negotiation.
Mm.
Um, and because he knew he had the upper hand in every negotiation, he always understood what it was. And he just walked in and he would play it straight away. It's like, if I don't get this, or can you tell me I'm going to get this by the end of the meeting, yes or no? If the answer is no, I'm cutting the meeting short and I'm out because I'm not going to waste my time. And it just flummoxes everybody,
Yeah,
right?
wrong
And
foot.
yeah, exactly. And I see Trump doing this straight away. It's just coming in and everyone's flummoxed. And then tomorrow he'll go, "Poof," and they've not recovered from yesterday yet. But we have to forget about yesterday and look at today. But actually, if you look at the achievements then that he's got in terms of the concessions, would he have got it the traditional political route? Probably it would have taken a lot longer. Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying I can see I can see why he's doing it. The problem is I don't think there's longevity in it, and there's certainly not favor in it, right? So, you either get people's backs up, like the European Union, who retaliate in kind. The British just sort of bow their heads, don't they, and just sort of go, well, let's just see what happens. We'll play the long game.
Charles
Um,
sorted out.
Yeah, yeah. But it just absolutely fascinates me. But coming back to the whole thing, um, understanding your customer, understanding people, understanding their story. So I always draw three circles on a piece of paper to help explain this to people. So the first circle is a large circle, and I say, this is how much you care about your story.
Mhm.
And then I draw a really tiny circle next to it, almost like the old penny farthing, the penny
Yeah,
farthing,
yeah.
with this sort of large wheel and the little wheel. I'm like, the trouble is, that's how much the person you're talking to cares about your story, right? But
Yeah,
guess what? And then you draw another large circle, the same size as the first one. That's how much the person you're talking to cares about their story.
yeah.
And if you can tap into that, that is true in e-commerce, it's true in business, it's true in politics, it's true in family, it's true in, whatever you want to think about. And I think Donald Trump, when I look at him, he has understood the story of the right conservative mindset in America, and he has played that well.
Mm.
Um, I think if I was to look at why Kamala didn't win, and this, hopefully I'm not getting too political here, but if I look at why Kamala didn't win, I think from a marketing point of view, she didn't understand the story of the electorate, and
Mm.
she didn't talk their language. Now, Donald Trump, of course, I think talks a language. which is very much right American. But the trouble is, of course, this is very it doesn't correlate necessarily with the rest of the world, and so I think it'll be quite interesting to see how international relations develop or change over time as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting times on that front. I mean, I wasn't actually so much getting into. I mean, it's clear that a large proportion of the electorate believe in Trump, and I mean,
Yes.
it amazes me how he's managed to get such a good grip on the Republican Party. The thing that I was trying to get at though was this your point about trust and integrity and the negotiating strategy, which is that you essentially you wrong foot your opponent, which gives you an edge.
Mm,
That's fine in the short term. What it doesn't necessarily do is build trust in the long term and business relationships.
no.
I mean, he's in power for 3 or 4 years, and then he's kind of
Then it'd be gone.
gone.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for us, for in a business context, if you want a partnership to work for 5, 10, 15 years, if you're thinking long term about, investing in work with a partner in a particular market to build up a big footprint there or something. I mean, that requires ongoing kind of
Mm.
give and take, doesn't it? It's slightly different.
It is,
You're
and
not trying to win over a particular constituency. You're just trying to get one partner to work with you.
you are, and I think this is why when you look at the trusts, the name has slipped me. There's a company which does a big trust report every year, don't they? They do a score on trust, and politicians are at an all-time low. We just don't trust politicians, right? It's true in this country. It's true
Yeah.
all over the world. There's very few politicians I've met and gone, actually, you're a decent bloke, or you're a decent lady. There's a few, but not many. Um, and so the trust is at an all-time low. And what's interesting, I think, is over recent years is people have started to trust in corporations more than they've started to trust in government. And even that's starting to wane now, according to the trust scores, because you see, and again, not with, you see people, I suppose, like Musk doing what Musk did, and right or wrong, that damages the brand trust of Tesla, and we've seen that right around the world that it is sort of plummeted as a result. You could look at Steve Jobs and go, well, Steve Jobs is not political, but there are certain things he is very political about, and if you don't like that, then you start to see these big corporations get political and weigh into things that maybe they shouldn't. So I think that then starts to erode trust, and so I find it quite fascinating that actually, who do you trust? It's a really interesting question to ask yourself to sort of ponder and think about.
And
Um,
how do you build a business that people trust? And that is critically important if you want people to keep
mm,
buying, isn't it? If they don't trust you, they're probably not going to buy from you. So building trust in the eyes of customers is pretty important. I mean, the point I was getting at is I think
yeah.
it's different from kind of politics. And I think one of the things that's interesting is, I talk to young people who think, or some of them think that things like The Apprentice and things like Dragon's Den are the real world. They're not. They're TV shows.
Yeah.
They're as
It's
bad
it's
as
really not.
they're about as connected to business as Love Island is. I mean, crackers, absolutely crackers. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Getting into kind of politics and TV and media, really, which is an interesting world, but probably a bit beyond the scope of this conversation. I mean, you've touched on some really interesting points. I mean, just when you look back on the journey that you've been on, because I mean, you're doing done lots of interesting things. I mean, when you look back on that, what would you say are the big things that you've learnt from that journey? um, the big things that you've done, the businesses that you've bought, the teams that you've integrated, the partners you've worked with. What are the big things that you've learned from those experiences?
So beyond what we've talked about already in terms of understanding the story, building trust, the know like trust factor, um, always there's always a different way is usually
Right.
the thing that you see, isn't there? It's like
And what
there's
makes you say that? Have you had an experience where that has happened, where you've had to find a way around something that you just didn't think you would be able to find a way
yeah, or you find a way through. I think, and that's entrepreneurialism, isn't it? It's
around?
with entrepreneurialism, you see innovation, you see creativity, you go, well, there's a problem. I feel I can solve it this way, and I've created a new solution. But entrepreneurialism is much more than that because that entrepreneurialism, I think you have to have a resilience, which you grow into, and resilience you can learn, I suppose, from a book. But reality of it is, it's not until you're under pressure again where you find out what you're really made of, and then you can address character flaws or character issues. And I think if I look back, I can talk about the wins, but I can also talk about the big losses, about how I lost a friendship with a really good friend over a business, about how I call it my $38 million mistake in the beauty business, how we lost about $38 million in sales. Um, Rightly or wrongly, I can look at these almost cataclysmic events, which ordinarily you would just go, "Phew, I'm walking away." But
Mm.
I think there's something inside the human spirit which says it's almost like there's a sense of calling, and you're like, well, actually, no, I feel like I've got to go through this because when I get through it, as much as I dislike it, I feel like I'm going to be a better person when I come out the other side. And
And
that's what resilience is all about.
would you say those sorts of things have, if you like, reshaped you as a CEO? They've had a
Yeah,
lasting impact.
yeah, I think whenever you go through something, it changes you, whether you like it or whether you don't. I mean, you know, you, I had a failed business partnership, which is where I lost a really good friend. And so now when I'm dealing with partners, if I start to see the same sort of things happening again, I address them way early. Do you know what I mean? Now, that may be a fear thing, it may be a triggering thing, or it could be a common sense thing. I don't know. But because I've gone through that, it changes how I approach things over here. And I think that that's true of anything in life, really. The older you get, the more you go through stuff. It's funny when you're a student, when my two boys have just graduated university, my daughter is thinking, what do I go to university? When I was at university, the world was very black and white,
Mm.
right? It just was insanely black and white. And then as you get a bit older, you realize that there's a few shades of gray uh, in the middle, and you have to accept that, and you learn to deal with that, and that's just part of life and experience. And I think once you've had that experience, that resilience, it does change you. And I think these events can either change you for the worse or they can change you for the better. They can either derail you or you can absorb it and adapt and move on, can't you? And um, I am constantly amazed and in awe of people that face the most adverse of circumstances, and yet they are the loveliest, sweetest, kindest people that would do anything for anybody. And it and that I find inspiring. It's not what they've achieved, it's just it's who they are in the midst of what they're going through. There's some great friends of mine who I would say are probably the most inspiring people that I've ever met. A couple that lives in the States, there's a couple lives in London. What they've been through and what they've faced and what they've had to deal with, yet every day they get up, they're grateful and they smile. Not in a sort of toxic positivity kind of way, but just in a genuine,
Mm.
yeah, life can be a little bit crap.
Mm. It's
So what?
impressive when people are able to do that. I've got friends that have done that, and it's
Mm,
it's impressive to watch. I don't know that I would be that magnanimous about those sorts of things, but it's impressive to watch, certainly.
mm.
I mean, what's it they say? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, doesn't it? I mean, one of the best pieces of advice I have, one of my mentors said to me, he said, "Look, life is messy. You just have to deal with it. It
Yeah,
just is,
yeah.
And it's always been very useful. It helps me keep my perfectionist tendencies under control. Because the world just
Yeah.
is the way it is. It
Yeah,
just
it is. It is. It's funny, isn't it?
yeah.
There's a guy I go see him once a week. My wife still she questions me why I go see him. Because I go see him for an hour and it's a painful hour. He is the most negative guy. He suffers from depression and anxiety like no one I've ever seen. I mean, no one I've ever seen. I cannot help him. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. Um, and he seems to get worse and worse and worse. And I'll throw in my thoughts when he asks a question or something like that. But it's not fun on any kind of level. But one of the reasons I go around to see him is because every after that hour, I come back and go, well, I can either choose to look at life like him,
Yeah.
or I can choose to look at what I'm facing in maybe a slightly different way. And it just it reminds me every time I see him of actually you can roll over and become the victim, and you can justifiably do that, but it doesn't help you in any way, shape, or form. And it's not to trivialize the trauma or what people have gone through, but ultimately, um, it it makes or breaks you. It's that what was the guy's name? Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, who wrote the book from the concentration. I mean, unbelievable. Um, and it's that kind of thing where I think that's if I look back over the years, I can talk to you about business strategy. I can talk to you about digital marketing and how to go from 500,000 to 3 million and all that sort of stuff. And it's all very fun and interesting. But what I can't teach people, what I can't teach my kids is, that whole thing that once you get knocked down, how to get back up again,
Yeah.
and just keep moving forward because eventually you get through stuff.
Yeah. It's something you have to learn. You can't
Mm,
be taught it, I think. It's like my father always used to say to me, you have to have problems to learn how to deal with problems.
yeah,
You can't, I don't think you can learn those things from a book. Resilience is
no,
something that is acquired by having to deal with problems and having
yeah.
no other option than to sort it out or
Just
whatever.
get on with it.
Yeah,
You can
that's
have mentors around you, which I think are helpful, and people that
mm,
are encouraging you. But you're right. I think you, there's a guy called Peter Daniels who you remember the day of tapes, cassette tapes.
no,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
I remember having a set of his tapes where he was talking about business. He was I don't know if he's still around or what, but I remember listening to his tapes and a very successful businessman. And he said this phrase, which I've never forgot. He said, "Listen, if you are living a life and you are having no problems, you've got this sort of problem-free life, you need to go home, get on your knees, and ask God why He doesn't trust you anymore."
Oh,
I thought,
that's
well, what a great thing. God, what a great way to look at life.
yeah, no, absolutely. And on that note, I mean, that was a great way to end this conversation. So thank you, Matt. I mean, what a great story. And, I really appreciate you taking time to come and share those thoughts and experiences with us. I mean, I think, I mean, I don't know how you feel, but business is one of those kind of never-ending journeys, really, which
Mm.
is what makes it so interesting. I mean, you've done lots of things over the last few years, and I'm sure you'll do lots of interesting things going forward. And I find it fascinating to hear those stories and to see what people have learned from them. So, I mean, I really appreciate you making a bit of time to come and have a chat.
Paul, it's been great. I just love. It's funny, isn't it? Because I host podcasts, so I sit where you sit. And I always love going onto podcasts because you just remember, you start telling the stories and you remember. And and actually there's something quite lovely about that,
It's
and
great. You meet the most interesting people. That's the thing I
yeah, yeah.
they're all very different, which is
Mm.
the other thing I love about it. I'm a huge fan of diversity. I don't want everyone to be the same. I like the fact that people are different, have different perspectives. For me, it's what makes the world interesting. And
Yeah.
yeah, I meant what I said. I mean, your story is fascinating, and I really appreciate you taking time to share it. I'll be in touch, Matt. See you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it, man.
Bye bye.